Thank you. There's no formal introductions or announcements.
Like one?
Nope, don't need a formal introduction. Just wanted to make sure there's no announcements or anything. This is a good sized room, but I want to make sure, can you folks hear me towards the back? Volume is okay, not too soft, not too loud, about right. Okay.
Who are you?
So the one thing that I don't tolerate in conference talks is heckling. And my name is Rob Sabourin, and I'm joined by Chris Blaine, and we're here to share some experiences and ideas related to the subject of active feedback as part of the software development process. Active feedback is a huge domain, and you can dive into the field of electronics, the field of social organizations, the field of psychology, all sorts of stuff. We're focused on just software engineering process and workflow. Chris and I have been working on this subject and this paper for about two and a half years on this particular paper. So I hope that you all get a chance to reference the paper. The paper has a dozen examples of active feedback in software engineering with a pretty detailed breakdown of where it fits in and how it can be tweaked and used. In this presentation, Chris and I hope to share two. We're not going to share dozens, we're going to share two. One is going to be an experience report by myself for the first 15 minutes, then an experience report by Chris for the next 15 minutes, followed by hopefully 15 minutes of dialogue, discussions, and comments. Does that answer your question, John? Who am I? No. No, can't stand feedback. It's dangerous stuff. Feedback. So feedback loops in software testing, software engineering, all that type of stuff. All right, so that's our little overview. So feedback loops show up. Let me know. Thumbs up. We're back on. Apologize for the feedback loop about feedback loops for the people watching us overseas right now. All right, just to give you a simple idea. Feedback loops are systems designed to adapt based on monitoring the output of the system. So you have inputs of a system, outputs of a system. You monitor the outputs to decide how you're going to process the inputs in the future. That's basically the fundamental correct as you go feedback loop system. Famously, Deming's plan, do, check, act loop, or plan, do, study, act loop is the sort of process engineering, quality systems feedback loop that a lot of our processes in software testing and software engineering actually fit. They fit that model sort of quite nicely. My story, my little case study here begins the day before COVID. I was in Manhattan. It was my last business trip before COVID. I was working with a Sorry. Should I stop talking? Oh, sorry. And in conclusion, is that feedback on the line? Let's close the door. We're back. Okay. So I was in New York City working with a giant, I guess it would be a customer management software corporation. And my mission there was to do task analysis of software testing that was practiced, particularly task analysis of exploratory testing that was being implemented by teams of people. So I went to this organization and I interviewed 4 testers about their recent experiences. And the experiences I interviewed them on were examples of success. So give me a success story, examples of a failure, give me a failure story, and a typical example, give me a typical story. And so I interviewed these 4 people, spent the time, did this very professionally following a method called the critical incident method of task analysis, have video recordings, audio tapes of the interviews, took all that stuff, luckily got back to Montreal, before the pandemic started, literally the day before, like they canceled all the flights like the day after I got back to Montreal. And I was sort of shocked at the nature of what I was observing in the testing system. The people, each and every one of them broke down their work by looking at something that they called a ticket. So these people were getting tickets, and their job was to process a ticket. They were processing a ticket, and they're looking at these tickets, and the ticket was something to do with testing, maybe, if that's what testing was for them. Some of it was... Some of them were about bugs from the field. See, I didn't cut that. Eh? Some of them were about acceptance criterion and mapping acceptance criterion. Some of them were related to functionality in the system, but they were all sort of little packets of work by themselves. And there's something, you notice you interview people, each one with 3 stories, and this is like very important software, very critical stuff going on. And not one of them suggested anything like we have a team working on this. And there were really crazy things, like there was a notion in their system saying an object, a ticket, is ready to test. So that was like a state of a ticket. It was ready to test. And of course, when I looked at that after deep task analysis, when they said ready to test, for me, that was the last possible moment you could start testing. If you didn't start testing by now, you're in deep trouble. But for them, that was the trigger to start testing. It was really weird. It was really funky for me to see this. But people were sort of proud of their ability to close tickets. They were basically trying to close tickets. The goal was to close tickets. They tried to minimize the time it took to close tickets. And then after they succeeded in closing tickets, then they got to the point where they wanted to minimize reopening tickets. So you're minimizing reopening tickets, trying to close them quickly, and you realize there's something missing. The horrific thing is missing in this. So the horrific thing I thought at the beginning was missing was context. So where's the context? There's no context in this. Where's the business context? Why are we doing this ticket? Is that ticket and that ticket treated the same? Or just because it's a ticket? And I'm not going to start naming tools, but this was all Jira stuff, which and I love Jira. I'm a champion of Jira. I spent the first 5 years in the early 2000s promoting using workflow management systems like Jira. But I never thought it would get contorted to the point that the software engineering work would be ticket management, right? Ticketing systems. So there was a lost thing. There was no context, no business, no technical, no organization, no cultural context, just a ticket, a ticket, a ticket. And they're proud testers, though. They're getting paid good money. This is New York City. You get top dollar for working as a tester in New York City. And still to this day, Chris, you have team members in New York City, right? So they pay a lot of money in New York City, right? They can pay their rent. That's a lot of money in New York. So this is what I observed. This is what I saw. And I'm going to show you now a little model. This also I saw replicated in easily a dozen other companies since. And when you start looking carefully, it's pretty common. It's pretty pervasive. So what we had here in their case was basically this is a little model of the work. The tester's in the middle of the work. There's a magical originator. Someone originates a ticket. And then there's a tracker, someone who tracks the ticket. They called the tracker, I think it was the Scrum Master, was their ticket tracker. That's like hilarious parallels to the railway industry, the ticket taker and the tracker. So anyhow, we have there, the whole thing was going on. And there was a loop. There was an information loop going on, but it was very, very naive and simple. The tester got something from the originator. And then the tester sort of might not have had the information that they wanted or thought was complete to do the job. Maybe there was some question about an implementation of a screen or flag or file, but whatever it was, they went and they asked questions and they created this very, very long chain of Q&A. You ever seen those long Q&A chains in tools like, well, Jira has them, but also it's famous for Slack. I mean, you just got 8 miles of questions, just forever and forever and forever. And so you got this sort of information thing, which is really, it's very hard to parse and very hard to look at after the fact, by the way. It's not building knowledge. It's answering questions. And so it's answering the questions you asked, probably truthfully. I'm not challenging the veracity of the questions or the answers. But it's not building knowledge. The tester is not taking each snippet of knowledge and building something so that they have like referenceable stuff like models and things like that. But that was going on. So the questions were being answered and there's this huge chain. And then there was the other side of it, which was basically the stuff that I train my kids on when we go on long trips. You know, they ask me all the time, are we there yet? Are we there yet? And so this is, of course, the role of the tracker is they're asking for status. And all your status is what you care about was the ticket closed. Is it closed yet? Is it closed yet? Is it closed yet? Is it closed yet? And you have, somehow it resonates with some people that notion, are we there yet? Are we there yet? So here we have what was actually the model at that company I went to before the pandemic started. And I guess it's a good thing the pandemic started because I didn't get a chance to go in there and look at more of this stuff. It would have depressed me. But I looked at this and I said, they believed that was productive testing work. But the feedback loops that they had in here between the tester and originator was informational, but it wasn't really doing anything to direct the work. It was just giving you some insights into answers that maybe you felt you should have before. And the tracker is just basically checking one thing, one status bit. Are we there yet? Are we there yet? So yes, there's feedback, but the tracker doesn't really give anything back to the tester to sort of change or affect. I tell you, is there not, it's true or false, and you sort of say, okay, I'm gonna ask you again tomorrow. It's not helping the tester do the job better. Now, if I was to take today that same dynamic with that same group of people, I will point out to you opportunities to build into your workflow what we call active feedback. And in active feedback loops, what you can do, and perhaps I don't want to say should do because I don't want to generalize, but in the case specifically of my customer, the product owner should have had a loop with the tester. The product owner is looking at risks to business opportunity and helping the tester focus and scope their work. Focus, how deep, what am I looking at? Scope, what's in, what's out? The tester says, okay, I got this ticket. Hey, product owner, this is what I think the scope is. Is this too big, too small? Am I missing something? Is there some business concern? Business concern, I'm not talking about the whole world here. Business concern from the product owner. So we're not just basically saying, hey, there's an originator answering dumb questions here, which I don't want to say they're dumb questions also. Each one was relevant at the time, but we have a record of them, like 10,000 of these questions. But here now, the opportunity, the business risk and focus and scope. How hard are we going to hit it? What part should we test? What part should we skip? Think carefully of the work of Edgar Dijkstra in the 1960s. Software testing can show the presence of bugs, but software testing can never show the absence of bugs. No amount of testing can be used to show a piece of software is bug-free. Therefore, that loop between the product owner and the tester is critical and actually, almost in my view, mandatory. It's not happening. It's not happening in the blind ticket. You're getting a ticket, you're closing the ticket, and you close it fast, and they give you an award for fast ticket closing. They don't give you an award for taking your time and testing the right thing well at the depth that's important for the business. Again, second person in the loop. Where was this person in the first analysis? I don't know. It's the programmer. The programmer can help us do the exact same thing. They can help us focus and scope our testing. And the loop is to redirect us based on the reality of the real technical work being done. So the tester can ask the question, what has changed? What has changed in the code? What has changed in the design? What has changed in the data? We can ask that question. And we can then say, well, we're going to focus on this at this depth, this type of thing. Does this make sense? Based on technical risk. So now the technical risk notion is a feedback loop between the tester doing the ticket and the programmer. Now you might also sense the three amigos type of concept here. Of course. You need the customer perspective, the programmer's perspective, technical perspective, business perspective. The other one here we have in the list, the user of the system. The users of the system can tell us what is real. How is the system going to be used? What else is going to go on at the same time? So we can communicate with the user. And again, that will help us focus and redirect and scope our testing. So you have three loops that are focusing and scoping our testing. And the fourth loop, the Scrum Master, are you there yet, carrot stick person, can actually be checking with us in a loop saying, hey, what's the status? Okay, I don't mind that. I don't mind you asking me what is there yet, But what I want the loop is the feedback. Here's what I can do to support your activity. Here's what I can do to unblock you. Here's what I can do to help us get the job done well, focus on the right things at the right time in the right method. So we have the exact same ticketing system, but with active feedback loops, well thought through. I think you sort of focus on things that matter and get the right job done well. I want to hand off to Chris to share his experience report. Is it the timing okay there, Chris? We lost a couple of minutes with people coming in. I know. I don't know what to do. I think we should just not let anyone else in.
Yeah. I think it's, I might have went second
We're
deliberately.
just trying to kill the time to pass the mic over. Whoa.
Hi. Welcome. Can you hear me okay? Great. So often in the industry, they say there's no silver bullet, and I do have a candidate for that, and you can ask me afterwards, but I do think a diagram is often a great way to move conversations forward. This is the most revelatory diagram I've seen in software engineering in the last 10 years. And so this comes from a great paper that is one of the big influences on the whole Safety 2 movement. You've heard about John Allspaw, you've heard about blameless postmortems, all of that work. This is one of the foundational documents for that. And what I love about it is that it encapsulates all of the tensions and dynamics of creating software and running a business. And so this should technically be animated, but the idea is in here, your project, your product, your company is constantly moving around, pulled by different forces and coming close to edges of where you're going too far. And so you're either going to have an outage, or you're going to overwork your team, or you're going to lose money. All of that's incorporated into this diagram. And so my experience report is that in action. And so, like I said, I highly recommend you take a look at our paper and read this paper, because it's very, very helpful, very influential. I haven't seen it enough in the software testing world. It seemed to come out a little bit, and it's kind of gone quiet again. But I think it's something that we need more of, honestly. So this is simplified as well. I like taking the really complicated cases. If I was a better artist, this would be more like an electron cloud. And so there's all of these arrows that should be going around here. I've simplified it down to kind of the essential elements that I'm going to talk about. And so in the center, this was a very critical data project to a company that was built on data. Without data, this company, there's no reason for them to exist. So this was literally their lifeblood. It was a project where they had a very large central system. It wasn't exactly a data warehouse, but for the sake of argument, let's just say it was their data warehouse. And they had to do this big migration of it. And they had a single external consultant who was responsible for doing this transformation of the data, literally and figuratively. That person wrote 250,000 lines of SQL code. And to put that into perspective, the first browser that Apple shipped had 250,000 lines of code. So just massive, massive amount of transformation, ETL code with no tests. So this could have been a very, very bad situation. Luckily, I had with me exactly the person you would want to have with you in such a situation. I was representing test management, test engineering team, and we came together in kind of a tiger team, crisis team, war room, whatever you like to call that. And we were working with these other teams, including the CEO, who was a technical founder, was a domain expert, so he did have the potential to contribute. But if you've ever had very high level management try to get into a really technical, sticky situation, it's probably not ideal. So I was there representing as I said, the whole kind of testing organization. We were there to literally make sense of all this code that was delivered to us. We needed to make this project successful. We needed to get this migration to happen. And so there was the data team that had taken a couple runs at this particular problem before, over several years, and a few times they had backed out, but this was the time that they were going to personnel that was there. This was a company where the dynamic was that the product owners were kind of running things. They were the ones that would drive things. So it was not an engineering driven culture. And so I think that's partially very important to the story. One thing that we had against us is we knew more than we were supposed to as the testing team. A lot more experience diving into really sticky data problems. And so that's not how it's supposed to be, right? We're not, we're there to run the test cases, give the test reports and things like that. But in this particular case, we ended up being the ones that were driving it. And my friend, Ben, whose real name is Joseph, but he goes by Ben, is just a fantastic sense maker. And one of the first things he did is he started mapping out the data. He made this fantastic mind map, which I wish I could share with you, but it actually wouldn't even fit on the screen. It was just giant by the time that we were done. And he started out by doing a bunch of data invariant testing. And I don't know if you know what that is, right? So you don't have to know everything about the data, but you know this value can never be negative. And so that's where he started to get a foothold, and he would go through and he would find these things, and he would come back to the data team and the product owner and even the CEO and say, hey, I found this whole vein of data that is just plain wrong. And he also, at the same time he was creating the mind map, he was also creating little scripts that would do the query, and he could update this query as he was going, make it richer over time. And so as he went through the project, he was pretty much the only one that knew, where all the bodies were with this data. And actually it turned the project upside down, and it was started to be driven by his test cases. And that feedback loop to everyone else would tell people, what have we discovered? What haven't we discovered? What parts are we feeling good about now? What parts do we need to dig in more on? And he actually, with the stand-ups and these meetings, these war room meetings that we had, start with his mind map. And people at first were they did not like the mind map because I don't think, number one, they understood it. It wasn't something that was like a diagramming culture. I think that's something that this really showed people the power of that, because you can write a lot of reports, you can make a lot of bug tickets in Jira, and how do you know where the project is? And so I think that was something that was very powerful in this particular project, is he almost literally made a map for people to follow in being able to understand this work. So that became the dominant feedback loop. And honestly, I think it was the only thing that let us go forward. I don't think any other constituency in here really had a process or a method to be able to make their way through this very convoluted, kind of intractable data problem. And so over time, that built a lot of credibility. And I think as I said, the conversation switched. And so the CEO was less involved because there was an understanding now and a feeling that this problem was under control. The team had a way forward. There was things they could report progress on. And so that in and of itself, I think, helped the project quite a bit. There was still a lot of tension between the product owners because they felt like they should be in charge. They felt like they should be driving it. And they were one of the people that didn't like this particular kind of exploratory process that we came up with. So there was a lot of work on my part to kind of behind the scenes work with that leadership to help them understand, we're not here to take away your authority. We're not here to, change the product in any way. We're here to give the feedback to help unstick, all of these teams, because this probably represented, I think, I mean, it was probably close to 100 people that were directly related into this project. So this was like very high profile, very important kind of project that we were working on. And so being able to navigate that and have people understand this process, because it was also a company where I think they were used to a more traditional kind of QA process, and this idea that you would do exploratory testing and you know, heaven forbid, testers would actually write code or knew how to write code. You know, maybe they had actually been developers, maybe they had computer science degrees, you know, all of these things that frankly they were unaccustomed to and not used to being from this particular group and getting that input. So I think, you know, in kind of talking about the outcomes of it, it is real life. And so the project actually wasn't successful. They brought us in too late, but they actually got enough information from it to be able to design a successful project. And they got different skill sets. They did not have just that single person on that central critical piece. And it was able to, you know, kind of spin it, so to speak, to make it more successful in the future. And they actually took all of those particular assets that have been created and used that as the basis for the next iteration of the project. And he happened to leave shortly after that for unrelated reasons, but it had 5 testers of their more traditional testers to replace him and give the same amount of information that he was able to give, given his unique skill set. And so I like I said, I like the example because it's kind of messy, because I think that's often how things are. They don't break down very neatly. There's a lot of personalities involved. There's a lot of egos involved. There's a lot of different parts of the company that are vying for different power structures. And so that's the other thing that I like about that dynamical model as well, is it takes all of that into account and tells you about how messy really the projects are that we're working on, and ways that feedback is important. Because I don't know if you've heard the statistic, you know, you need to repeat something 3 to 5 times or 3 to 7 times. I've heard the new statistic, you need to repeat something 10 to 20 times for people to really understand it. And so that's part of, I think, in the work that Rob and I are doing, and what kind of made us think this was so important is, I think a lot of times in my experience, teams and individuals talk past each other on software projects. You're so focused on getting your work done, and you don't necessarily think about moving the entire project forward or getting the most information you can out of what you have at the time. And I think that being sensitive to this and seeing the lack of a feedback loop, I think often they're not there at all. But I think at the same time, the feedback loop is there. The projects are talking to you. They're telling you very, very clear messages. And maybe some of the people on the project are getting those messages, maybe nobody is. But I honestly think that a lot of times, a lot of the frustrations teams have is because of just ignoring or not cultivating the feedback loops that are probably already there. So that is my experience report.
Just a teeny bit of folk wisdom. that I'm still learning a lot about the subject of getting feedback from people about using microphones properly. So, is that going to help? Hello?
Yes. Great.
Sorry about that technical glitch. Is that good or bad?
You just keep going. Do we want to open up for questions?
Yeah, so feedback loops can help amplify the effectiveness of testing and the overall software development process. Let's talk about this. Let's invest the next 15 minutes in jamming about what matters to you guys, not what matters to Chris and Rob.
Yeah.
So the facilitator has to help us because we need to identify who's asking the question.
Not so much a question, but a comment. So in my organization, we have people that are afraid to give feedback.
Yeah.
And so that's the problem I have is I go out and ask my developer, my POs, my BAs, their opinion, what more can I do to make this more robust? and they'll get a response back.
You know what a good trick is? It's really funny, but it's a that you can choose. Have you ever tried to like get a group of people to go out to lunch and to pick where you want to go to lunch? So here's the trick that it's 90+% of the time. You say, where do you want to go for lunch? And it's a mandatory vote. Everyone has to vote. And there's some weird positive trick there where that really works. And suddenly you'll get everybody voting and saying where they want to go. And honestly, I think the same thing can work when you're talking to people. It's like, you know, on projects, no, I have to have your opinion. You have to go with your opinion. And maybe it's private. A lot of people aren't comfortable doing it in a big conference room, especially if you have, you know, a group like I was talking about, the CEO is sitting there at the end of the table and, hey, I want your brilliant ideas, you know. It's like, not a lot of people always speak up, right? It's not necessarily a place where they're comfortable to that. So I think cultivating those places.
There's also some interesting reference material that I can point you to. Jerry Weinberg did a book on feedback, which is actually, I think your question is very important. The whole book, it's all about people, right? And people are multi-dimensional, as well as variables, especially emotional ones. And if you're not used to feedback loops, sometimes sound like negative criticism. Instead of big process, hey, adapt, it's better. But I've seen cases that clarify when people aren't sensitive to that. I've seen formal inspection and something like this, where the person who is the author gets feedback, which is freaking awesome technical feedback to improve it, to make this the best data they've seen of everything in their life. And the person stops it and only trying. And it's terrifying. So they just saw everybody pour apart their work and it was negative and all that stuff. So being sensitive to the people of human aspects of this is very important. And I can't emphasize that it's outside of my knowledge to teach how to do that. But I've learned from some excellent teachers over the years. And I would get started with like language book and maybe Tom Gilbert, Dorothy Graham's work.
Yeah.
And maybe
Esther Derby.
Yeah, some of their work is relevant to
They do the retrospectives. Where everybody has to.
But the thing is, the feedback we're talking about here is not all warm fuzzy. Esther Derby type of feedback. It's also deep, hard technical stuff.
Yeah.
So it's like focusing everything on what features matter is not something that's the soft skills style. And the notice is what has tons of stuff on the people side of it, right? But they don't have very much stuff on the hard technical side. I think you got to look at both.
Yeah.
So I will very often make a criticism saying the old idea is not for us to come out singing Kumbaya. It's for us to respectfully advance and achieve our goals and hopefully we're taking it wrong. I don't want to I know. Do you want to add to that? Or?
No, it's good. It's
I've covered a lot of ground.
it's hard.
Another way to get people engaged, you're not getting engagement. Give them a completely wrong hypothesis.
So there was a question, it's been exact there, is it? Does anybody knows one?
There's two opposing things going through my head. One is you want to get early feedback, right? That's kind of a principle, as quick as we can get feedback.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's also the idea that in a crisis, the feedback that you get or what you learn initially is wrong.
Yeah.
I'm getting that from Jocko Willnick, like when
Yeah.
you have military stuff.
Yeah.
First report, not correct.
Yeah, and I think that was what really helped on the case I spoke of is it's like, okay, let's see what's actually on the ground. Let's send out spotters and see where things
Right,
are.
and basically the reality. The thing is though that it's a misconception that I faced myself. I've screwed up a lot over years, and I used to think that early feedback was always the best thing, and it's not, in my experience, always the best thing. There is, I think, in many cases, a type of feedback that's going to be like the last response to the moment. And if you give it too early, someone didn't have a chance to refine and adapt something, and you're giving them feedback on an incomplete thing. For example, the paper submission process at one software testing conference I just recently submitted a paper at has this interesting feedback mechanism. And it's very interesting, great conference, but their feedback mechanism is really weird.
we submit the paper and then we get feedback within minutes, right? About all the great, wonderful things and issues and concerns, but it's like a very specific point list. And we got that and we act on it. And then probably the day before the deadline, with our final submission, we get this how many page long criticism of our paper with tons of things to change. Nothing wrong with it. It was just, oh, it was way late. And I think what should happen is that early person should not have sent the feedback quite yet. They should have waited for the other person combine their result instead of maybe it's a midpoint. So early feedback, I think, gave us a false impression that our paper was in much better shape than it was. That's a good example. I'm picking on Chris' question. We never named
The voice of late feedback is really killing.
Yeah. Right. But
Hey, cool. The model that you showed, Chris, I didn't get how that relates into the situation. I've never seen that diagram. So what was it that made that helpful in that difficult situation that you were in?
Well, just to me, it's always a reminder that like it's a system. And so no one group was going to solve that problem. And so it needed to be all of them together, but they're all pulling on different things. In this case, you know, it was the stereotypical thing, management wanted a certain date, which I believe is reasonable for management to ask, right? So they're pulling toward that part of that diagram where you're going to just turn people out. Like there was no way this is going to be solved by just applying, you know, just pure brute strength to it, so to speak. Like if there was an insight to be gained, you know, that would be a different kind of problem. And it was just a big code. And so the other piece was operationally, you know, that's one of our concerns. Like we couldn't see putting this into operation. It wouldn't be maintainable. We couldn't evolve it. So that pulling, you know, toward the upper quadrant, that is like failure in the system. And so that for me, that's how we tie together. Be curious if anybody else saw, you know,
that picture you did.
Yeah. You know, and so yeah, that's acceptable performance. That's when you have an outage. And that error margin is like, how close to the guardrail are you going to go before you hit it? And so that's the kind of, you know, SLAs that you put in place, the testing that you put in place, the monitoring that you put in place. All of those things are going to let you have a smaller error margin because you're confident that you can do that. But, you know, I really think that, you know, boundary of unacceptable workload, that's for people. That's the people part of it. That's the other part that I really like of this diagram, because usually in these models, they don't talk about the actual people doing the work, right? It's the software, it's the business, it's the market, you know, customers are maybe the people, but like the teams themselves don't get talked about in a way where all of these things are related together. That's why I love this diagram.
Thanks.
Yeah.
So Robert, you showed your ticket-driven case study, a couple of diagrams as well yourself. One that I believe you put forward slide for the ideal, I gathered, and you've got 5 parties involved here. Given these parties involved, we can go back now to the example of how not to do it. Where can you help us appreciate where these 2 missing parties might have been in the original example? How they actually getting feedback in one way or another, but if it
So I first of all, but is this on? I don't know. Do we care about this? We don't care about that. So thank you. That's a very important question. I really wish I did. I have no freaking idea. We were probably going to like it's not bothered. But because they were coded, this particular example happened, and that project really got suspended because we weren't able to collaborate the same way we usually. It took months for us to figure out how to collaborate again. And so I never had a chance to talk to the project owner to say, like, why aren't you actively involved in the discussion? But I'm almost certain that the project owner didn't realize that they could just spend a few minutes a day or a couple of days on Slack or a phone call with the testing person and dramatically improve the quality of the product. So I just think it's naivety. So people were just so caught with this ticket system that they didn't realize that there was this software engineering intervention possible. But the good thing is that I was brought in to look at these things, just that the project got suspended. The people who brought me in were very, very wise to have someone from outside look at the system.
Because they were caught in the tyranny of the urgent. They were caught in the tyranny of what they were doing day by day. And I was sitting back and doing the task analysis of it. And the interviews put it all of 45 minutes of interview to do the task analysis they described. And it's not a long time because you can't take people out and stop them from productively doing their job. I can't take them for a week and explain to me, I got to do it specifically. That's why we use storytelling to do it. I get them to share stories, share experience. What we're trying to do meta about here today is rather than giving you a huge lecture about stuff, give them maybe 20 some stories. So the correct answer is I don't know for that, but I believe that it wouldn't take long to convince the product owner that just a short intervention from time with the tester and create that dialogue will end up in improvements in the scope and focus testing. And the testers should proactively look for these things. No one's job it is to tell you where there's an opportunity for feedback loop. So I think you should actively, as someone testing, look for those and then work with your peers, work with people to build them. Not everyone's going to want to talk to you at first, but building opportunity. When that opportunity comes, it'll make a difference, and then it should stick.
And I appreciate that, maybe it's a follow-up, like, it kind of seems to me, I'm a very visual kind of learner. Like, if you took product owner and programmer out of this diagram, effectively it's the exact same diagram, just through the screen. But I think it kind of, what I'm gathering is that the scores that it's not so much the flow of the feedback, but the quantity of feedback loops maybe happening concurrently.
Well, I hope it's relevant, but if it's not relevant, we don't need the feedback loop. So that's Chris's point about that there's some business stakeholders that might have been involved in this loop that discovered that maybe they weren't in the loop, but I didn't know them. Yeah, maybe someone in the support department might have been doing a feedback loop with. I don't know. There's a list. That's what makes one of the examples in the paper. There's a lot of different examples. But think about testing. Think about if you're doing testing and you style it's like session, it's break your work up into little chunks. Imagine if you take feedback of your findings in every session and feed it back to someone and learn from it. What should I need to focus on testing on the very next section? And they can take actions on what they found. They don't wait for some sort of change for it. So it's the correct thing. So because of the basically in that case, it's the frequency of the feedback. Like I want people to take action on my work shortly after I did it. Now, maybe the product owner is less available, but still you can figure out that there might be appropriate opportunities to have that dynamic. I would definitely want the programmer to be very frequent. Yeah. And unfortunately, some of the testers I talked to didn't even know who the programmer was. And it's a big company, and you probably use their products. And
I don't want to get sued. Is that our time?
you done?
Okay. So I think that's our time. We're happy to chat afterwards.